All right, here is the Fantasy Face Effect House filter. I laughed about this in the meta video too. I am not great at naming these things. I am keeping it also, though, intentionally generic because these templates are concepts for you to be able to easily throw in your own assets if you like the mechanics of how they work, but also to give you an understanding of what's going on so that if you really start to play around and customize things, it's a little easier to get in and understand how to get things done and make your own versions of both these things, but also your own original ideas. And so I thought a lot about, from a template level, what's going to give you the right foundation and footing to make relatively simple effects that don't require coding and cover a lot of use cases of effects that I've been hired to create professionally or I see out in the wild frequently, that kind of thing. So let's get into it with these effect templates. I kind of go scene hierarchy over to properties if they're relevant, coming back into the assets, talking about that if it's relevant or something that could be complicated to understand, and then we'll jump into the node graph. So in our scene hierarchy here, the first thing to notice is that we sort of have a general section here, and kind of a segmented 2D background effect area. So if you haven't seen any of the other effect templates before, or been through the interface, or you're unsure, the way Effect House works, they tend to composite different camera views together into the final output. So if you have a bunch of 2D elements, there might be one camera handling all of the 2D stuff, and then you could have 3D elements elsewhere, and it's being handled actually by a different camera. So that's just how they work in this kind of environment. It's a multiple camera rendered or composited into one view. And it does give you control and a kind of an organizational way to think about what's looking at your assets and what the unique properties are and the layers and stuff for that camera and what that camera is responsible for. In any case, with this effect, it's just handling, the main camera up here is just handling our segmentation. So we have a day and night background, and you don't see the day just because of the stacking order in Effect House. The night is actually on top of the day. This is the day, and that's the night. And then the portrait is the actual framing in this master image of where the segmentation is taking place. Users right here. This main camera here is the 3D camera. So the thing that's going to be rendering out like the face mask. We've got our eye glows, lips, face stretch. In Meta, this is the deformation face mesh. In Effect House, this is quite different. They offer you the ability to take this generic face, and you'll see this is just something you can add in your inspector. This is something you can add into your inspector for that element that will say which face, 0. That doesn't mean no face. This is program speak, which in a list of items, so if it sees multiple faces, it'll see not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 faces. It will see 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. In a lot of programming languages, the zeroth or the not element is the first element of a list of elements. So you just subtract 1 in your mind. So you're not referencing no element here, you're referencing the first face. How much should the face stretch special renderer here affect the face? You can adjust that. I have it set at 50. So it gets more extreme more quickly if you increase the intensity of that. If you don't want what you change here when you pull stuff around to affect the other side, then you would uncheck the symmetric box. And if you just wanted to make sure you didn't accidentally mess with anything after you're happy with it, you could check lock. So this is a unique quality in Effect House that isn't replicated quite this way in Metaspark Studio, where you can just click and drag on this stretch and you see what will happen to this default face underneath it, that's what you'll start doing to the face. So there's some pretty funny effects out there where a face is found and you see suddenly people have googly eyes and weird things happen to their mouths and all of that. That is a combination of people making their own textures that they apply over this stuff and deforming the face. Undo that. So in this face stretch, I have done very little. Also, I feel like, this is just a personal opinion, but I feel like if you start messing with this area of the face in particular, you can start to get into weird areas where you could start making things that are like culturally insensitive. So I'm just going to say that. I'm just going to throw that out there, something to be aware of. You might not care, or that might be the point. But just it's come up before behind closed doors in the process of making effects that involve deforming a user's face, that there might be things to consider there. Not trying to vague book that statement, but I think you know what I mean. It would be very easy to deform the face in a way that it becomes culturally insensitive to a variety of cultures. So it's something to be sensitive to, unless you're purposely trying not to be sensitive to it. That's your business. Not telling you what to do or not to do, just letting you know in the world of troubleshooting and fixing things that happen and back and forth with clients, especially if you're not doing things strictly for yourself, that's something to be prepared for as a conversation. We have the glow holder here. So that's for the eyes. When they actually blink, we should actually play the effect and show what this actually does, shouldn't we? So we're in daytime and we have kind of special eye coloring here, fantasy eye coloring. And then when the user blinks, we have some eye glow stuff happening. And when they blink, it's back to normal. But also there is some subtle adjustment to the facial shape, kind of going for something maybe a little bit more elven. I was trying for this kind of pronounced animated pulsing happening. The background changes, and actually there's a kind of a lookup table, a color grade that applies over everything as well. Also audio effects when you blink on and off. One for when you transition on, one for when you transform off. Pause that for now. And that's that I call it a LUT, a lookup table. This is from like filmmaking VFX world, but that is a shorthand for me to say a color grade or a color effect that's going to happen that was going to apply over everything. There are actual LUTs that you can incorporate and use in Metaspark Studio and Effect House, and I'm doing a more quick and dirty way of just applying a general wash material color over here that has a opacity that's pretty light with a coloration over it. But it achieves in some ways it can achieve the same effect as using a proper like shader over this. But that's all I'm doing here. Then I have the ambience holder here. There is a general looping ambient track that's copyright royalty free that you can keep in there if you want. There are also audio effects that you can hear that you don't see a representation for here. We're dealing with it in the node graph, so we'll get into that. Over here in the inspector section, not too much to call out that you didn't already see. The big thing I wanted to draw your attention to was the face stretch ability and how you mess with that. With lips, there is highlighting and interesting stuff happening on the lips there, and that is on the face mask. And it's using this lips highlight texture. Which is actually a full face mesh that's transparent with a separate little area just for the lips. So you could use this as a template going forward for something that was just going to apply to the lips. The file for that you could use. That gives you just sort of this base that you can then apply your color effects to directly in your face mask. So let's take a look at the assets over here. What do I want to call out? We have three audios. We have the D-Transform, the ambience, and the transformation audio. They're just MP3s. Not much to call out there. Materials, pretty straightforward. We have a bit of blush and glow happening over here. Very subtle. We also have some facial tattoos. And you can see that it's not on for both sides. I'm doing it just for one and then flipping the other into the other axis. Saving on file size there. I think we're not a very heavy effect anyway. But that keeps it low. And it's just not necessary to... You'll see in Metaspark Studio I do have it for both, but showing here that it's not necessary. And actually doing it this way can sometimes give you more flexibility and customization options for fitting more faces. It just depends. Meshes, we just have the face mesh. This is just the generic one that came when you added it. When you add it in here. You get a 3D face. In our assets here, we have the textures. Pretty straightforward. This is actually a square aspect ratio on this image. This was generated with Midjourney, I think. There's an ethical conversation to have there, I think, because we're not, as of this recording, which is in April of 2023, we're not totally sure what to make of the fact that it's a blend of real people's artwork or art style versus what you've prompted and the AI has generated. So I right now don't have anything published that uses this. I don't know if it's something that will get people in trouble or not. I think it's kind of a gray area is the most honest thing to say about it. The worst that can happen is probably a cease and desist, like, no, that's my art, you gotta take that down. In which case, you would just take it down. But for now, I'm not going to put anything up for the public that is incorporating assets that I haven't directly modified myself. And I guess I advise the same, but you do what you think is right. And yeah, it's just an interesting conversation that as of right now doesn't really have a resolution yet. Here we see we have our eye sequence, and I'm using a combination of things here. The green eye glow might be the one that's currently incorporated. You see this has a kind of funky poppy green glow happening there. Just a texture sequence, so I didn't make my own sprite sheet. I just went here, import, texture sequence, and then there are options there. I just multi-selected some PNGs, and it brought it all in as this. 512 by 512 transparent PNG. And then some placeholder stuff that gets colored or shaded directly elsewhere in the eye color. So the asset itself is not colored. This is just giving us those nice negative fill areas for that daytime. Let's see if we can show the daytime here. Right here. And yeah, you see, again, this is just stuff to help sell the effect, but that you can adjust the colors of which dynamically with your nodes or in your inspector panel. And then the general portrait segmentation you get, this is automatically generated by Effect House. The skin smoothing texture, also generic. You can also, so this redness is calculated in such a way that it's just being applied to everything along the face. Is what's happening there. And you see it's not a hard edge, it's got kind of a bit of feathering. So if you do your own adjustments, keep that in mind and you can use this as a template. All right, let's get into the node graph. So how I typically organize these is very American English, I tend to go left to right and then up to down. And there's kind of an exception here in this orange section. This is all just initialization stuff. So it's all just the effect starts and what do we need to make sure is hidden versus what do we make sure is visible. As with the other couple of effects, quite a lot of things are really just about toggling visibility. When you have transitional effects and reveals and stuff like that, a lot of the times it's just dealing with visibility issues. So let's zoom in here. At the start of the effect, just once, we want to make sure that everything is invisible. That visibility on box is unchecked. And we string all that together. With Effect House, the design of the effects strongly encourages like linear flow of data. So you see very often in these templates and effects, you see this next going into an enter, and each one triggers the next in a flow. And in this case, toggling the visibility off of these objects that it's tied to. But you see there are multiple connective pipes headed out because that visibility will get toggled on elsewhere. So that's all that's happening in this big orange box. Not too bad. Just making sure that elements are invisible to start. All these nighttime elements. Also happening around the same time, we have our face detection right here. So for our facial movement, we've got our just begin. It detects a face, specifically looking for an eye blinking, either of them. And it's detecting face 0, which does not mean no face. Moving through here, so if we detect a blink from that face, part of this condition becomes true. And we want to make sure that the detransition, or detransform and transform audio play when they should and not both at once, which will bring us back to this area right here. There's a conditional here that keeps us from stomping on each other with both things playing at once. So if we detect a blink, we're going to go in and play this audio. We'll drill into this now. It's not too complicated. Into this subgraph here, we see it's just our audio resource, the audio for the transform, and the speaker for it. So even though we don't see it reflected here in the hierarchy, we can reference it here in the node. It'll still work. It's up at 100%. And we want to make sure that data flows out through it because we are tying that audio and the playing of that with the other effects. So we come back out. We get that output, comes out, setting visibility on of the eye glow. We've strung it in there. So we're turning the eye glow on as we're playing that audio. We're also turning on, we are turning on the LUT holder, that blue cover, and that slight facial deformation, and turning on that background. Where you see we don't have to turn off the day because we already know that this background is actually stacked on top of the day. So we don't have to get into toggling the day image. We can just turn the night on and off. We also turn on the face glow option. And that's what happens when we get the on. When we get the off, I did not do that intentionally. That's just what happens. Both Effect House and Metaspark Studio will do that. They don't like to remember the coordinates of your nodes. So we just have the same thing, but now we're playing the detransform audio. Simple. We let Effect House know that we've done that by flowing that data out. And now we're just turning things off. And you've seen we're just referencing these objects. And visibility off on all of them. except we have a difference here because of that LUT holder. The important and slightly funky and different aspect is that eye glow, we want to make sure, like I said earlier, that these things don't pounce on each other and negate each other. So we have it so that every other pulse from this gives us the conditional that allows this to play. All right, so we get the visibility of the eye glow. And if it's not true, then we're available to play the transformation audio and start that process. So let's look at this play real quick and pay attention to the pulses you see. That condition's available. Now that condition's not available. Pay attention, especially right here. So instead of both playing at once, because that blink was detected, it's toggling between one or the other. And you might get a hint from that how this can be useful in other things where you want to choose one thing or another thing. You can get the state of your object. And you can do that a couple of different ways, but by doing add node, get time, the system time, visibility, then tying an object to there. In this case, eye glow. So I had eye glow, and up here, get eye glow. You can tie that in there. So those get options are very useful. If you need to change the state of what's going on, you can just see what the value is, and then if that value is a certain thing, do something else. And that is about it for this. So it's a pretty simple matter of initially making sure all of our nighttime assets are off, and then, depending on the blink, playing that audio and swapping the visibility values. Also, down here we have oops. Also down here we have oops. Also we have this offset here. What is this? This is making sure that these eyes, which are unnaturally sized, correctly conform to the placement that we want on the user's head generally. So update, as the effect plays along tick by tick, we keep getting new positional values as the user moves. And we make sure that we have these offsets from the face info fed in so that each of these eyes, the left eye and the right eye, have those values associated with them. Get from array is a useful utility for pulling the values out of something. In this case, you'll get these values in the form of a vector 2, which is x and y, on the x and y plane. Then we offset them with subtraction, and multiplying that offset allows it to shift its coordinates from what it is in this plane to the visible plane here. The coordinate systems are slightly different, so you multiply the value, in this case by the resolution of the viewport that your phone is going to use. So the combination of that offset and the constantly changing values keeps each glowing eye affixed where you want it. And that should do it for this effect.